Welcome, dear readers. You're listening to Time to Read, a Winnipeg Public Library podcast book club. We're recording today from various locations around the city of Winnipeg, which is within Treaty 1 territory, the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ininew, and Dakota peoples, and in the National Homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation in Treaty 3 territory. In this episode, we will be discussing Kiss of the Fur Queen by Thompson Highway. I'm Dennis from the Idea Mill, and I could really use a personal yodel catchphrase. Across the screen from me is...
Hi, sure. Hi, I'm Trevor from the Red River Library, and before I read this novel, I thought I had a pretty good idea of where babies came from, but I was wrong. And across the screen for me is...
I'm Toby. I'm an outreach librarian, and me, a Mexican cowboy.
A good book can carry me away from an average and ordinary day, yeah. So keep it down, leave me alone, close the doors and turn off the phone, 'cause all I ever really need is a little more time to read.
And you, dear readers, we wouldn't do this without you. We'd love to know what you think about the books we're reading. You can find our email address and all our social media outlets by going to wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca and scrolling to the bottom of the page. Hang around till the end of the episode to enjoy our favorite segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds. Before we dive in, let's do a quick check-in with the panel. How you guys doing?
Okay.
I am recuperating from a knee surgery, so hence our recording remotely this month. So that's what's going on with me.
Yeah, this is sort of back to the way we used to do it during pandemic times. So it's a bit of a throwback to Dennis's technical mastery, wizardry in a way.
We won't call it wizardry.
No, that's insensitive to the wizards.
No, just technically sufficient.
Sure.
I think is the...
You feel like it might be kind of making something
I don't want to set expectations
mystical.
too high.
No, fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, the only bit of news I have is that Winnipeg Public Library has announced we have a new writer in residence for the upcoming year. So congratulations to Nora Decter, who is a writer and educator. She grew up in the North End, and she studied writing at York University and Stony Brook University. And then she returned to Winnipeg to be an instructor at the UW. She's written a YA novel, How Far We Go and How Fast, which won the 2019 Kobo Emerging Writer Prize in Literary Fiction. And her debut adult novel, What's Not Mine, came out recently. and she, I hear it's great. And she's available for consultations between October and April 2025. So if you're listening to this podcast between October and April 2025, there's more information on our website of how to contact her. And if you're listening to it after that time, you're out of luck. But congratulations for living in the future. And I hope it's better and not worse.
Along with the writer-in-residence, Winnipeg Public Library has also announced 2 makers-in-residence, which start at the beginning of October, so next week at the time we're recording this, but it's already started by the time you're listening to this. They are Tracy Charette Fair and Janet Murata, and they'll be working with us from October to December this year. They'll have a variety of drop-in sessions, and they will be doing some programming as well. A lot of it here at the Idea Mill or on the 3rd floor of Millennium Library, and some of it out at the branches. So you check our website for information and check the programs and events list on our website for the specific programs and drop-ins and when they're going to be. It should be very cool. As long as we're checking in, we often tell you that you can email us. And we don't actually get a lot of email. It's pretty rare. But we did get an email after last month's episode from listener Brenda, who also happens to be a coworker of ours. And she just remarked that she had also read the book and had not enjoyed it and was hoping to be validated by listening to our episode and felt validated that we also did not find it as funny as an award-winning humor book would suggest. So that was nice. But she also mentioned that there were a couple of runoff elections recently, and the one in Montreal had 90 candidates for the runoff election. She thought that would have been something that would have been fun to include in this book. And yeah, it probably would have been good.
Well, Terry Fallis is still writing, so maybe he'll be inspired and add that as a plot point into his next book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other items for checking in? If not, we're going to leap forward, and Toby's going to tell us about the author, after which Trevor will give us a summary of the book.
Okay, Thompson Highway. He was born December 6th, 1951 in northwestern Manitoba. He was the 11th of 12 children, though only 5 survived. His parents were Pelagie Cook and Joe Highway, and Joe Highway was a caribou hunter and a champion dog sled racer. The family were nomadic. They traveled by dog sled and lived off the land. At 6, Highway was enrolled in the Guy Hill Indian Residential School, where he learned to speak English and play the piano. And then he finished high school in Winnipeg. He studied music and English at the University of Manitoba and the University of Western Ontario, earning a BA in music in 1975 and a BA in English in 1976. After earning his degrees, he worked as a social worker on First Nations reserves across Canada, though was mostly based in Toronto. At 30, he decided to put his artistic and social work experience together and started writing. He wrote and produced many plays that ran in Toronto, eventually achieving national recognition in 1986 with his 6th play, The Red Sisters. This was followed by its companion play, Dry Lips Auto Move to Kapuskasing, which was the first Canadian play to receive a full production at Toronto's Royal Alexandra Theatre. These 2 plays continue to be produced and studied at theaters and universities around the world, which I can confirm. I read these plays during my theater degree. From 1986 to 1992, he served as the artistic director of Native Earth Performing Arts in Toronto, at the time Toronto's only professional Indigenous theater company. His brother Rene was also involved in Native Earth as a dancer and choreographer. Rene died from AIDS in 1990, which inspired Highway to write the autobiographical novel Kiss of the Fur Queen, which was published in 1998. He's also written children's books, a musical, and an album. He published the memoir Permanent Astonishment in 2021, which deals with the first 15 years of his life. And so he plans to write 4 more memoirs to cover the rest. He's won a whole bunch of awards. He was named one of the 100 most important people in Canadian history by Maclean's, was inducted into the Order of Canada in 1994, and holds 10 honorary doctorates. He currently divides his time between residences in Ontario and Gatineau with his partner, Raymond Lalonde.
Well, listening to that biography, really, I was thinking he was checking off things that I have in the novel summary, and there's lots of things that you'll hear that I say that will sound very similar to what Toby said. So the summary of this novel, Kiss of the Fur Queen, as Toby mentioned, is written semi-autobiographical. So it opens in 1951, right in the middle of a dog sled race in magical, snowy northern Manitoba. Abraham Okamassis, a caribou hunter, narrowly wins. Part of his prize is a kiss from the winner of a local beauty pageant, a young white woman with the title of Fur Queen. This touch of white culture leaves its mark on Abraham and his family for decades to come, and becomes a recurring image throughout the novel. Abraham and his wife, Maurices, soon become parents, first to Champion and a few years later to Oninew. In their small community on Mystic Lake, the Roman Catholic Church dominates. The boys are baptized and given European names, Jeremiah and Gabriel, respectively, and are all too soon torn from their family and thrust into the hostile world of a Catholic residential school. At the Birch Lake Indian Residential School, the boys are put through a number of horrors, all intended to alienate them from their Indigenous culture. Their language is forbidden. Their hair is cut short. They are referred to by their Christian names exclusively, and they are indoctrinated into the idea that their beliefs are evil and pagan. In addition to this psychological abuse, the boys are regularly physically and sexually abused by the priests running the school. We follow the boys as they become teenagers and young men trying to adjust to life after residential school and as they move to Winnipeg. They each become acclaimed artists in their own right. Jeremiah on the piano and Gabriel is a dancer and choreographer, working within the dominant European traditions while never quite losing the influence of their Cree heritage. This tension is evident even in the structure of the book itself. At key moments throughout their lives, the boys encounter the spirit of the trickster, often seen as an incarnation of the fabled Fur Queen, who famously kissed their father after the dog sled race. The trickster subtly guides the boys, encouraging them to explore their natural artistic talents as a way of reconciling their separation from their Cree culture, while never fully assimilated into the dominant white culture. The novel follows the boys from the idyllic innocence of their Cree childhood through a forced relocation to an abusive residential school to their lives as young artists attempting to discover how far their natural talents can take them.
So how'd you guys find it?
So this was a reread for me, but I remembered very, very little of it. The only thing I remembered, I read it not long after I first moved to Winnipeg, and I didn't know what Polo Park was. I was reading it in a class, and they were talking about Polo Park, and I had no idea it was like a mall or what it looked like or anything. So that's my memory of reading this book in the past. Reading it now, it was okay, I guess. I found that it's extremely literary, and I think that's part of the reason you see it on syllabus often, but it's so full of language and imagery and symbolism and disrupted timelines and disrupted dialogue, and there's so much rich text going on, and I just found it a little disorienting. And while I enjoyed the story, I think it's really important. I think the characters are great. It wasn't a book I really looked forward to reading.
I can sort of second Toby's take on it in that I did find it difficult, and maybe this was intentional, to kind of get into this world. I thought it was very interesting how Highway incorporated Cree into the story, where there were some times where there were passages that were just in Cree, and it wasn't always clear from the context what the characters were saying to each other. And if you wanted to, you could take a break from reading and flip to the back where there was a glossary of Cree terms translated to English. And sometimes I would do that. But when I did that, that kind of took me out of the flow of the story, because then I had to go find my page again and go back. And so I sometimes would decide to sacrifice meaning in favor of experiencing the moment. And again, I thought I don't know if that was intentional or not, but there were sometimes if I was just in the middle of reading a scene, I was like, you know what, I want to just go with this. I want to immerse myself in this, and then maybe go back and figure out exactly what these words are meaning. So, and there were tons of moments of, you're not sure if this was a dream, if this was sort of just a memory of, was the narrators creating a cosmology. What I did really like about this book was the two brother characters, that I felt they were super well developed. They were complex. Myself being the older of two brothers, I could definitely relate to the relationship between them. They certainly weren't perfect. They were both deeply flawed. They loved each other. They were not always there for each other. I wanted to keep reading for those characters. I found them very believable, and I cared about what happened to them.
This is my first time reading Thompson Highway, but I've heard the name before, and at least one of my coworkers had recommended him strongly many years ago. I just haven't gotten around to it, so it was an interesting introduction. It was evident very early that this was going to have a lot of magical realism in it, but style of writing, which isn't always my thing, but I enjoyed the way this book flowed. As you mentioned, and it comes up a lot in reviews because it's hard to avoid, there's sections of the book where it's kind of difficult to tell exactly what's happening, because he will jump between time periods and start in the middle of conversations and things like that a lot. Sometimes you're not sure which parts are a dream and which parts are actually happening. I don't know if it's because of the way I read it. I read it, most of it, in a period of 2 days, so I was able to keep a kind of a flow going with it. Sometimes I'm tempted, when I'm confused by a passage, to reread it over and over until I kind of get it. But I didn't do that this time. I just kind of let the confusion stay with me as I kept reading, and it started to make a little sense as I was going along. And I felt like that did a good job of kind of eliciting the feelings of confusion that the characters had. And it didn't distract me enough to take me out of the story at all. So I got a lot of kind of emotional responses from reading it that way. But I can see why a lot of people don't like it. When I was looking at that aspect of it, when I looked at reviews, that was one of the more common complaints, is that it got confusing at different points. I really enjoyed his use of language. A lot of stuff I haven't seen before, the way he writes, it felt like a unique voice to me. There was a lot of humor in there, along with a lot of really dark stuff, but he didn't bog down at any point. The whole residential school part was a lot shorter than I expected it to be. It was kind of like here's some things that happened, some key points, and he moves on. And the whole novel kind of went like that. There were like key spots where you're checking in on their lives, and you get this kind of bit by bit all throughout their lives. That worked for me. I found it very emotionally affecting, so I enjoyed it quite a bit.
One of the things you just mentioned about the residential school portion of the novel being short, and it was, and the other thing I found remarkable was that it seemed like the narrator, the voice, was almost indifferent to a lot of the things that was going on, kind of telling us this is what's happening, but not sort of making a value judgment. It was almost like as if these things have been reported, and then it wasn't until later on do we start to see the effects of them, almost like as if the characters had blocked them out while they were happening. In fact, I think some of them were saying, I don't remember this, I don't remember that. There are these sort of like time periods where you see the effects of the school without even fully understanding the horror of it at the time, because the boys didn't fully understand what was happening at the time either. I read an interview with Highway that was saying that he thought of this book as he was writing it in Cree, and then he would have to translate it in his head to English, which accounts maybe for some of the difficulty that the three of us had reading it, and that he was saying that, in English, there isn't that concept of sort of circular time. So when he was writing about things that are happening in the present, but also in the past, it came across as kind of confusing. Also, in Cree, there isn't sort of the gendered language. So there were certain concepts that he just couldn't fully develop in English. Again, so it might come back to the whole language thing. I thought it was interesting, too, that the structure of the book was broken down using Italian, like musical terms throughout, which, again, almost puts the whole story again. It goes to show like the dominance of the European culture. Even on this story, the structure is based on a European model of art.
Yeah. Like, I think part of what I find disorienting about the book is the way it plays with time, but I appreciate that Highway is coming from an oral storytelling tradition, a more kind of organic, indigenous way of telling a story that, I'm used to, or I expect, or I enjoy, things that are, more Western, more linear, more pragmatic, and Highway isn't giving that to us here. And I appreciate that he's, just trying to articulate something that's out of that Western literary tradition.
There's a real tension in the book between Indigenous traditions and Western traditions, which I thought he maintained very well. Everything in their lives is very much affected by the way Canada is, the structure of the church especially. It's imposed on their lives and structures everything, but it's in conflict with their traditions. And he mentions many times in the book the difficulties of a native Cree speaker speaking English, because English just doesn't feel musical or lively enough. Like it's, I think there's one point where they compare it to just kind of this stodgy, kind of repetitive sounding thing, and that they can't communicate well in it, which I guess is the author saying, I can't communicate as clearly in this as I would like. If you read this in the Cree, it'd be a whole different thing, which I buy.
I wonder if the glossary was his choice or if it was a publisher's directive, because I think about Hijab Butch Blues, which was full of Islam terminology that I didn't understand, and there was no easy place to look it up. But that's, I think, something that we liked about it, and how it just was like, here I am, this is the word I need, and this is the word I'm going to use. And if you want to look it up, you can, but it was unapologetic in that respect. And in this, it helps you out if you need it, if you want it.
If you know it's there. I didn't realize there was a glossary at the back of the book. I got all the way to the end, and it's like, oh, here's these phrases. Okay.
You're probably better off not knowing. Yeah, because every time I went there, I kind of regretted it afterwards, because it kind of broke the flow of the narrative.
It does disrupt it, yeah.
No, I felt that was part of, for me, kind of riding the confusion in the book, just kind of going with it and accepting, here's some things I don't quite understand. I think I know what this one means. Okay, I don't know what that means. I just went with it. It was just part of that, part of the dreamlike sense to me.
Another interesting thing at the back of the book was his acknowledgments page. And at the very end of it, there was something that I thought kind of speaks to what we're talking about, the linear versus dreamlike writing, and how we were naturally maybe drawn to one over the other. This is what he says at the very end. He says, some liberty has been taken with the chronology of certain historical events, the Fur Queen beauty pageant, for instance. As a certain philosopher of ancient Greece once put it, the difference between the historian and the poet or storyteller is that where the historian relates what happened, the storyteller tells us how it might have come about. So I kind of thought that might be an interesting distinction that,
I didn't have that in my book.
You don't have that?
No. I have this version.
Okay. See, I have, hold it up on the screen, you can't see it because I got my...
No.
Yeah,
I don't know, this might be scribbles, but I don't know if that's a signature or if it's like a scribble.
That's amazing if it is.
Yeah. Anyway.
The other thing, incidentally, I don't know if you guys noticed the cover of, I don't know if your copy has this, it's like a bird's eye view of a dog sled race. And it was giving me Billy Summers vibes. Remember the cover of Billy Summers?
Yeah,
it was
with
like
the footprints? Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, just thought I'd mention that.
Anyway, my book does not have that bit you just read, so I missed out on that.
So maybe people were complaining, I don't understand this, so he had to write the acknowledgments for the paperback version.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
I had a thought and I forgot what it was. Anyone else got thoughts?
There's a lot of themes in this book. I think, as I've mentioned, there's a reason it's on a lot of, syllabi. There's a lot of things that you can pull out. We talked about language. There's music is a huge theme. Religion is a huge thing. I mean, there's so much of like the color red in here. I mean, I think there are maybe not hundreds. There's a lot of theses that have been written about this book, and you can really see why, because there are so many threads that you can pull out and just expound upon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we were talking a bit before about how you would present something without judgment, just kind of put it there. And I remember thinking when reading passages about later on as they were adults and they were coming back to their visit family, things would be happening like, there'd be a lot of house parties and people were firing guns all over the place, and it sounded quite dangerous, but also it didn't dwell on it at all, so it was hard to gauge how dangerous it was. Like the neighbor was going to come over and he was getting his gun and something, and they were like holding the door to keep him out, and it's like, wait, are they just about to get shot? Like what's going on? And then, the one lady is running from a guy who has a gun, and then he hides from him in the bathroom, and then gets hit in the head after she tries to leave and just ends up on the ground. You're like, wait, did she just die from a door hitting her in the head? And that combined with the way that, sometimes you'd be in the midst of a dream, it made it, I don't know, like everything was dreamlike in a way.
And then someone actually was killed with being hit by a door. Because wasn't there the door on the outhouse at the airport?
No, isn't that?
Well, that's the one I'm talking about.
Oh, that's what you're talking about.
I thought that just knocked out Annie Moose-Tooth, whatever. What is her name? Annie Moose-Tooth, her one tooth.
Yeah.
Isn't that the door? The outhouse door knocked out her last tooth?
No, she still had her tooth. She lost the tooth in a poker game.
But someone died though, didn't they? Someone actually died when that door hit.
Well, they described it that way, and then later on in the book, they mentioned that was like the third time she'd died. So it sounds like she just got a real hard whack to the head, and they talked about, it was like part of the sense of humor, oh, she died again, but she didn't. Well, yeah, and the contrast between like their experiences there versus in Winnipeg or in Toronto, it keeps that kind of edge, how they were always in two cultures, always in two very different places. And unfortunately, neither of them ever really felt home in either. When they were kids, everything about their lives was natural. They were happy. But then once they were in the residential school and they started being abused, especially, at that point, they didn't feel comfortable there, obviously. But also when they were home, they didn't feel like they could tell their parents because especially their father was very religious and very opposed to questioning the priests. And they didn't think like they could tell him anything, that he would just side with the priests automatically. And so then suddenly they don't have a home anywhere. They can't really go home.
Yeah.
But they also aren't really at home anywhere else. That I think was the most painful aspect of the book, the isolation that both brothers felt. They only had each other because they both knew what they had gone through. But that was also a tense relationship. And there were I don't know how long it was. It was a couple of years they didn't talk to each other.
Yeah. And even longer when Jeremiah didn't play the piano, too. And he was sort of just in the wilderness, not literally, but, working as a social worker and giving up on that part of his life that kind of gave him joy, which was so complicated too, because he learned to play piano at the residential school, which became part of his identity. And so that's a whole complex thing too, that they were introduced to these things that help define them.
Yeah, I mean, in the same vein as, Jeremiah learning piano at residential school, I find that the conflation between religion and sexuality really interesting too, because, obviously these terrible things happened to both brothers with being sexually abused at the schools. And then later on, when Gabriel comes out as a gay man and is very conflicted about that because his first sexual experiences were terrible and at this school, and how do you reconcile those things? Yeah,
man, that whole thing made, again, for a very complicated relationship between the brothers, since Jeremiah couldn't cope with the idea that his brother was gay.
And doing similar things that happened to them, I guess, consensually at the school.
Yeah. Well, and then I guess it's towards the end of the book where Jeremiah remembers that he had been sexually assaulted, penetrated from behind. And yeah, that would have added to the conflict in him about his brother's life, which, again, he only got pieces of because Gabriel didn't really want to share that a whole lot. Man, it was heartbreaking just seeing these characters struggle with everything and how to figure it out. And there isn't really, it kind of resolves with them working together, but it still felt unfinished in a lot of ways. I don't know, did you feel a sense of resolution at the end?
Only, I guess, in that Gabriel dies, so that is resolved. But yeah, who knows with Jeremiah, what's his future going to be like?
That sort of final scene on Jeremiah, with Gabriel on his deathbed, I imagine that whole scene almost staged as a play. And with Thompson Highway's experience as a playwright, I could it was a very visual scene with Gabriel's wishes. He's saying to his brother, just no priests. I don't want any priests here. And then Jeremiah, honoring that wish, but at the same time, the mother showing up with the priests. And then you had, who was it? Amanda Clearsky and her grandma showing up with the indigenous medicine. And so I thought that whole
fire alarm.
Setting off the fire alarm in the hospital. And then interestingly, then the trickster character appears. And the very last thing that happens is winks at Jeremiah, I believe, as Gabriel's spirit is taken. And I was wondering what that wink meant. And it also gave me a chance to reflect on the trickster characterization throughout the whole book. I'd be interested to hear what your guys' take on the trickster and how the trickster spirit played a role in this story.
This is a much less accessible trickster than I guess I'm used to. I'm thinking of Eden Robinson's books, for instance, where the trickster is a very, very real character, where here, you're just getting glimpses and is this the trickster? Is this a figment of your imagination? I guess I'm familiar with the trickster as a character who plays tricks, who disobeys rules and who defies conventional behavior and who disrupts normal life. And here, I don't know if they do that much. I did get a little drag vibe from the Fur Queen, and so I enjoyed that, but this isn't as, I guess, traditional, quote unquote, of a trickster character as I'm used to.
I enjoyed this version of the trickster partly because it was so hard to gauge their intentions. Like you say, what is the trickster doing? Like the kiss at the fair, and then that brings a star child into the universe, and that star child is then birthed to Abraham and his wife. So it's like a child of destiny, a child that is fated for something special to happen, but then he goes through all these terrible things. And the trickster just shows up from time to time with little things like, oh, here's some tickets to the ballet. Just out of the blue. There was that one conversation that Jeremiah had with, I think Trickster called herself Maggie at that point. And they had this conversation, and it was very profane,
it was like an Arctic fox.
Yeah. Well, it was like a fox, but then not. There was that, and so there's this conversation, and it's and that's not usually the type of conversation, you expect when speaking to a deity. It's kind of all over the place. And again, you don't really know what the trickster is doing. You don't know what the Fur Queen wants for them exactly. It gave them little nudges here and there. It, may have prevented some trouble here and there. Who knows? But always influencing, showing up, doing something unexpected, and then that's just a part of their lives then.
Yeah.
But I have no idea whether it was meant for good or ill. It seems to be positive, protective stuff, but not a lot of it.
Yeah, exactly. If I didn't see the trickster as like a guardian angel at all, because I mean these two characters went through some horrible things. Like the trickster didn't intervene at certain times, but in other ways, the trickster did show up at key moments. Like even that small gesture of providing the ballet tickets was a huge influence on those kids, both in awakening Gabriel to the world of ballet and dance, but then also reaffirming Jeremiah's love of music. And it was just, again, you want to use the term magic, but a magical moment. But yeah, there were times like I almost wanted to go back through the book again and read it with a different sort of point of view, trying to point out, like, okay, is this the trickster? Is this the trickster in this form? Because, like you say, they take many different forms, and sometimes, like, I didn't really know all the times that the trickster was involved, and maybe there are some times that are so subtle that it's hard to pick up on. But that wink at the end kind of got me. Like, did that mean sort of like everything's going to be okay? This life has been lived, and it's. Don't have to worry. It was just like a little cheeky thing at the end with this little wink. And I don't know what to think about it.
I assume that any time that an attractive woman with a fox fur, that was the trickster. The red
lips. Anyone with red lips.
Yeah. And fireweed. Yeah. Fireweed was a big part too, wasn't it? Yeah. Showing up every once in a while.
So a minor thing, but something that caught me off guard a few times in the book is that it's set in a few places, including in Winnipeg. But the places chosen in Winnipeg, they weren't real places. Jubilee Concert Hall.
Polo Park,
Jubilee
though.
Concert.
Yeah.
Well, Polo Park, yeah, but Jubilee Concert Hall was a big thing. And based on the location and the descriptions, kind of figured it has to be Centennial Concert Hall.
Was it ever called Jubilee?
Not that I could find. I looked at the Concert Hall's website and their history, and it didn't mention anything about Jubilee. There is a Jubilee Concert Hall, but it's part of Mennonite Brethren Collegiate Institute's thing, and it's much more recent. And I thought, was there one before and it got torn down? But I couldn't find any reference to it. Well, they also mentioned that the Central Library was on George Street, and I looked it up, there is no George Street in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
Sometimes streets, they exist for a while and they go away, but the Winnipeg Central Library was never on George Street. And I found that a weird choice because, I mean, he lived here.
Yeah, and there are some actual references to real places like Polo Park, like North Main, like the Bell Hotel. So it's odd that he would have a bit of both.
I guess maybe that's still a little bit of that blurring between dream and reality, but although most people wouldn't catch it unless you were from Winnipeg and felt just a little bit off about some of the locations. And never actually called it the Bell Hotel. Always referred to it as the Hell Hotel.
Yeah.
I like that part when you started to see the school and the priests, but from the boys' perspective, who didn't know anything else, and they're calling them, the men were wearing dresses, or the priest was talking about describing the different images of hell, and they were thinking, well, that looks pretty great, and
Yeah, I liked that playing around with Catholicism, even, the mistranslations of the Latin, like dominoes and me a cowboy. And then, later on, at some point, someone mistakes the word Palestinians for Palace Indians. I guess that's not Latin or Catholicism, but it's funny.
Pretty great wordplay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, the wordplay was next level in this book, too. The use of language, I thought, was just beautiful. He could really shift tones, too. That was, something is serious, and then something's very funny, and then something is heartbreaking, relatively close to each other. And for a while, everything is clear and makes sense, and then it's suddenly dreamlike and, wait, what just happened? It's...
Yeah, I mean,
really kind of went all over.
For someone whose first language is Cree, who's writing this book in a language that's not native to them, he does have a mastery over English and can make it do beautiful things.
The one passage that really stuck out for me that was like this was the one where you're talking about Jeremiah playing the piano and the notes kind of turned into Canada geese, and how they sort of flew from the north and spent some time at this residential school and then moved a bit west, and then suddenly eventually landed in a living room in Winnipeg. And just this idea that the music can travel through time and space. And it was just sort of almost like a recap of what had just happened. Again, like playing with timelines, but it was just a beautiful paragraph that it took me, when I finished reading it, I just took a little break and it's a gorgeous image.
And it's kind of amazing that he wrote plays first, because plays have no room for descriptions like that. It's all dialogue, and all of that was just inside of him,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like we could keep going for a while, but we're running out of time, so we should probably start wrapping up. Are there any kind of final thoughts about the book you wanted to share?
I mean, this is his first and only novel, which I think is interesting. He says he's writing a second novel, but, he's quite busy writing memoirs right now, so who knows if we're going to get another one from him. But I think as a first and only, it's quite remarkable.
All I can say to summarize is it definitely deserves a place amongst the great Canadian novels. And again, it's been studied and read and reread, I think, for very good reasons.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this book and highly recommend it. It's just an interesting read in a lot of ways. There's a lot of heartbreak in it that you can really feel, but I think it's definitely worth a read. Okay, so with that, we may as well jump to Can You Tell Me a Book I Would Also Like? Who would like to recommend theirs?
I will go. So my book this month is Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese. Have either of you read that? Oh, wait, was that your book, Trevor?
It was my book as well, Toby.
Oh, wow.
But,
okay.
That's fine.
All right. Well, I'll say my bit, and maybe you'll have some more to add to it.
I'm happy to hear what you thought of it.
Okay. So, I chose this book because it's another person's experience in residential schools, as well as the aftermath of that. It's from approximately the same time period. So this is about a character named Saul Indian Horse. He recounts his life in a treatment center for alcoholics, where he's ended up after he had a recent binge and he almost died. So he talks about how he was raised by his grandmother after being abandoned in a blizzard in rural Ontario. He's sent to residential school where all the terrible residential school stuff happens. At residential school, he discovers he has a natural talent for hockey, and he ends up on a local Ojibwe team. And his hockey career progresses. He ends up on a minor league in Toronto, but racism gets in the way of his hockey career. So he stops playing hockey, he finds odd jobs, he wrestles with his trauma. And it's a short, accessible book. I think like Thompson Highway, Wagamese is a poetic writer, but his style is much more sparse and pragmatic. So I think it's a more accessible novel than Kiss of the Fur Queen. And just a good, important read. And I understand there's a movie, which I haven't seen, but that's now on my to-watch list. Do you have anything to add to that, Trevor?
I'd like to talk about a book called Indian Horse by Richard Wagamese. Absolutely. Everything you said, it's all the same reasons why I picked it as a book that you would also enjoy. And also, I just wanted to mention Richard Wagamese as an author, if you haven't read, to definitely check out that, his writing style is very accessible. He's written some nonfiction as well. Everything I've read by him, I've enjoyed. I also have not seen the movie, but it was interesting that one of the executive producers on it was Clint Eastwood. And the way he got involved is that the movie was directed by the person who Clint Eastwood has used as his chief camera operator for the last 20 years. And so he showed it to Clint Eastwood, and it was, I guess it just opened the whole world of, he had no idea about Canadian residential schools. He didn't have any idea, and felt that this movie needed to be seen by more people. So then he did whatever Clint Eastwood does as a big Hollywood mover and shaker to get the movie out to film festivals and around the world. And I do want to see it. I don't know why I haven't, but the book is it doesn't play with time the same way, but there are moments that kind of hit you in a different way. No, I don't think I have anything more to add. Indian Horse.
So I also, no, just kidding. I went with what I thought was maybe an obvious choice that one of you might pick too. In Search of April Rain Tree by Beatrice Moissonnier. In this moving story of legacy and reclamation, two young sisters are taken from their home and family, Powerless in a broken system, April and Cheryl are separated and placed in different foster homes. Despite the distance, they remain close even as the decisions threaten to divide them emotionally, culturally, and geographically. As one sister embraces her Métis identity, the other tries to leave it behind. Will the sisters' bond survive as they struggle to make their way in a society that is often indifferent, hostile, and violent? So, this one doesn't have any of the magical aspects of Kiss of the Fur Queen. It's much more down-to-earth, written in a much plainer style, but still deeply affecting. It's taught in school now in Manitoba, but when I was in school, it wasn't yet, so I hadn't read it until a few years ago. It's one of those books I think everyone in Manitoba should read, and of course people beyond that too. It's very emotionally affecting. It just opens your eyes to a lot of things, because that was also a semi-autobiographical novel, which followed her life pretty closely.
Embarrassingly, I haven't read that one.
Oh, then you totally should.
Yeah, I definitely should.
Well, to be fair, you weren't born in Manitoba.
Yes, that is my my defense.
It's definitely worth it. It's also much more accessible, and there isn't playing with time or anything like that in it. She's not a poet, but it's just one of these from the heart kind of writing things that it works really well. Now for everyone's favorite segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds, where we spend some time introducing words we like to each other and chatting about them briefly. Whose word should go first?
I'm worried that Trevor and I have chosen the same word now.
Oh, then we got to give it to Trevor, I think.
Okay.
All right. My word is maybe more of a phrase. It's 49 dance. I don't know if this is something
Not
that
my word.
Okay, so this is something I came across. I had sort of mentioned in the summary that the structure of the book kind of reflects this tension between European and Indigenous cultures. And so although the structure of the novel is broken up into 6 parts, each named after an Italian type of music, there are actually 49 chapters in the book. And one commentator said this is a nod to the 49 dance, which is a social dance and song repertoire that developed among Indigenous peoples in the southern Great Plains region of the United States, and the type of dance and song cycle that you may see at a powwow. And so I just thought I'd mention this. I had not heard this term before, 49 dance, and I thought it was very interesting. And so I will put a link into the notes about more of the history. It's more of an American term, I think, than a Canadian term, which is why we haven't heard so much of it. But if it is true that Thompson Highway structured his book to have 49 chapters to reference the 49 dance, as well as the European structure of the Italian, then he's a genius. I don't know whether it's a coincidence or not, but 49 dance.
So I was worried that we had chosen the same word because you said this word when we were recording, and it's fireweed, which comes directly from the book. And I knew it previously in the context of the Fireweed Food Co-op, which is an organization that runs a farmer's market in my neighborhood. But then it shows up in this book quite often. So despite its name, it is not a weed, it is a wildflower, and it is pink. And I realize this is, an audio medium, but I do encourage you to go look up a picture of fireweed because it's quite beautiful. It gets very tall. It can grow up to 6 feet. And it is found all across North America, from quite far down south all the way to the Arctic. It is even the official flower emblem of the Yukon Territory. And it thrives in open meadows, along streams, roadsides, and forest edges. In some places, it's so abundant it can carpet entire meadows. And the name fireweed comes from its ability to quickly return to areas that have been burned to the ground by fire. It was apparently one of the first plants to appear after the eruption of Mount St. Helens. And as a plant, it is important to Indigenous people in North America. It can be used as a fresh or cooked vegetable, as a tobacco substitute. You can make a tea out of it. It can be used as a poultice. You can use the stem fibers for thread. So that is my word. It is fireweed.
Nice. So my word for this month is yodel. So Merriam-Webster defines yodel as to sing by suddenly changing from a natural voice to a falsetto and back. Also to shout or call in a similar manner. Growing up, I think my first exposure to yodeling was from watching The Sound of Music. And probably because of that, I've always associated yodeling as, a Swiss thing. And although it is an important part of Swiss alpine folk culture, it is not exclusive to that area of the world. Ethnomusicologists believe that the origins of yodeling can be traced back tens of thousands of years to ancient African nomadic hunter-gatherer societies. Yodeling appears in Persian classical music and Central African music. It also is associated with some styles of blues and country music, especially cowboy music. Famous Canadian musicians who were known to yodel include Wilf Carter and Stomping Tom Connors. And of course, the movie version of Tarzan offered up one of the most recognizable yodels in cinema. Yodeling has always sounded cheerful and joyful to me, so the descriptions of Abraham yodeling "Weeks chillawoo" as he pursued the caribou really brought out the thrill of the chase that he was experiencing. Yodel. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this month. Thank you so much for joining us, dear readers. For our next episode, we're going to read and discuss Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. When Elizabeth Bennet first meets eligible bachelor Fitzwilliam Darcy, she thinks him arrogant and conceited. He is indifferent to her good looks and lively mind. When she later discovers that Darcy has involved himself in the troubled relationship between his friend Bingley and her beloved sister Jane, she is determined to dislike him more than ever. In the sparkling comedy of manners that follows, Jane Austen shows us the folly of judging by first impressions and superbly evokes the friendships, gossip, and snobberies of provincial middle-class life. Have comments or book suggestions for us? Send us an email. You can find all our contact info at the bottom of the page at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. You can also find all our past episodes there too. If you haven't already, subscribe to Time to Read on your favorite podcasting service. Maybe leave us a review. Tell your book-loving friends about us too. And until next time, make sure you find time to read.
Wow, there's a cat.
Aww.
Yeah, he was about to climb onto my computer, so. This is Stinky.
Stinky.
His official name is Oscar, but Stinky has stuck.
Oh, but after the farts, he got renamed.
It was more like the litter box.
Oh, poor Stinky.
Wow, Stinky looks adorable.
Oh, yeah. What a cat.
So fluffy. So cute.
Come on.
Hello there, kitty cat.
Oh, man. I mean, this is gold. I mean, this really it needs to be a video episode. We've got Dennis's, the comedy stylings of Dennis in the sound booth, and we've got a cat.
He's the special. The cat is the special guest.
Oh.
Yes. We would like your cat's opinions on the book.
We should have had your cat when we did the French exit.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah, that would have been perfect.